What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, the internet's #1 theological podcast. We bring you ingredients each week so you can brew your own faith. And today on the podcast, you're going to get to hear from Ted Vial, who is a professor at Iliff School of Theology, the sponsor of this episode of Homebrewed Christianity. Wow! Oh, the people. And here's why. Because Iliff was one of our major sponsors at Theology Beer Camp in Denver this past summer. And as we're nearing the end of the early bird ticket sales for Theology Beer Camp this summer in Asheville, North Carolina, August 16th through 18th, we're releasing the goods, some ideological temptations, you could say, to come to Theology Beer Camp this summer with so much fun that we had this past summer. In this episode, you'll hear about the essential 3 rules of Theology Beer Camp. You'll hear me and Peter Rollins. He was my tag team partner for Beer Camp this past summer in Denver and Oklahoma City. Yeah, you're going to hear some reminiscing about our time as roommates. It was a time Pete lived, with a family and children and dogs. It was a unique and special time for him. And we blessed him. We blessed him. We did. Anyway, but most importantly, Ted Vial is back on the podcast, and we're going to talk about 19th century Germans. That's right. Tripp and Ted's excellent 19th century German philosophical theological adventure is happening. We love 19th century Germans, me and Ted. And we're going to talk about them. Pete's going to talk with us too, okay? But it did not work for a play on Bill and Ted's excellent adventure to be like Tripp and Pete and Ted's excellent 19th century German. So it was like Tripp and Ted's. And just to be honest, Lacan wasn't a 19th century German, so it's hard for Pete to get as excited as I do about 19th century Germans. And Ted and I both are fans. We're both fans of the 19th century Germans and how they frame the way we talk about religion and politics and spirituality and all sorts of religious pluralism and even race and things like that. So you're going to hear about it in this episode from Theology Beer Camp. And when you're hearing the fun and the excitement, then think unlimited craft beer from local craft breweries available in a homebrewed Christianity pint glass in a room with 100 other theology nerds hanging out, day drinking, nerding out, geeking out all together. Think of a late night excitement. Think of cornhole competition. Think of a plethora of formats and interactions. All high-quality theology excitement. And this summer, Theology Beer Camp in Asheville, North Carolina. You should come. TheologyBeerCamp.com. Through the end of April, you can get your early bird ticket, which is good. It's cheaper than regular price. And not only that, it secures your space because it will sell out. And I want you to be there because this summer is the 10th birthday of Homebrewed Christianity. So, do it. Now, before we jump in, we got to give shout-outs, proper shout-outs to Iliff School of Theology. They were sponsors at Theology Beer Camp. And if you're thinking of doing divinity school, getting your Master's of Divinity, maybe an MA in theology, or you're going back, going to get some doctorate of sorts, then you need to think about Iliff School of Theology. They're so cool. They didn't just want to sponsor Homebrewed Christianity. They want to sponsor Beer Camp in Denver. And there are a bunch of their students that came to the event. I'm friends with them. They're awesome. So, if you're in the Denver area and you're wanting to nerd out with your geek out and do it professionally as a graduate student, then think Iliff School of Theology. All right? When you do, just tell them. Say, you sponsored Beer Camp. How could this not be an amazing partnership we're entering into as student and community of learning? You don't have to do that. I was just thinking. All right. Here we go. From Theology Beer Camp. This past summer in Denver, me and Peter Rollins. Enjoy. So hi.
Hi.
My name is Tripp. This is Theology Beer Camp. It's important who here has been a youth minister before? Who's done it for more than 10 years? All right, these people completely understand. There's no reason not to be clear about expectations. Because just because you know them and their parents and their grandparents, and you've had positive experiences with them before, it doesn't mean you shouldn't lay down rules. So there are 3 essential rules for Theology Beer Camp. Number 1, don't get arrested. Or do anything that should you have gotten caught, you would get arrested. I hope you all have a friend with a smartphone. Use Uber if you need to use an Uber. And no, you shouldn't use fireworks indoors. I've already asked. And we have a volunteer driver right there. So don't get arrested. I told my youth this for years. And it mostly worked. Second rule, don't get hurt or do anything that could cause you to get hurt. So like if you show up tomorrow to meditate in the morning and your face is telling us through sign language that you hate existence because, quote, I got my drink on, end quote, you're responsible for yourself, so don't get hurt. You also shouldn't do things that could get you hurt. Like look at a person you just met at Theology Beer Camp and start like kicking them, and then they kick you back like because they got guns like Nathan. So don't get hurt. And the third rule, this is the most important one. Your cups are made for refills. Like Homebrewed Christianity is a podcast, so we record things. So you can relive the experience of all things. So if you start talking to somebody and it's hilarious, go in there and drink while you do it. Because Pete gets easily distracted. I have 3 children. I talk without anyone hearing me all the time. But you know, you have to be delicate. And plus, if you're rude, he tells no Seamus stories. It's really, like, you have to be nice to him. And he talks about Seamus, it's his cousin. I don't know if you've ever met his cousin. But now I want to tell you a story.
Ooh.
So we're almost to the 10th anniversary of Homebrewed Christianity. 10 years ago, I started a podcast because my theology reading group at church didn't read the books. So I interviewed them and put them on rewritable CDs. Then my friend's like, there's a podcast, you should start one. And now we're going to drink a lot of beer and have Theology Beer Camp. But the reason Pete agreed to do this, other than obviously my prayer warrior status, is because we were speaking at an event 7 years ago or so, and we were the only people who knew who Badu was and had a conversation about it, and then I decided I liked him. And we became friends, have done a lot of stuff together since then. And after he moved to the other side of LA, which is kind of like if you live in Denver, moving to Texas, I was like, dude, we should do beer camps this summer, and it gives us a reason to hang out. And then we'll be in a room where half the people are like, dude, I love your podcast. And the other half are like, Pete's really hot. I like his accent. And then the other ones are friends with Brew Theology people. So we're very glad you're here. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I thought before we get things started, Pete, I want you to introduce yourself as someone other than the one who broke the Nerf camo hide behind setup that my father-in-law built for my son on his birthday. He's still sad.
I just had to win. I'm very competitive when it comes to Nerf battles. Because Tripp and I used to live together. I don't know if you know that. So we lived together for about a year. Isn't that right?
Beautiful days.
Beautiful, yeah. I mean, it was amazing living on my own and then suddenly having 2 dogs, 2 kids, and 2 semi-adults in the same space.
Alicia's a full adult.
She is, yes. I'd be able, you bring it down a lot. But the reason why I'm here is I also love to be in rooms of pastors, because pastors have a superpower. I was just sitting there listening to Ryan, and their superpower is, very quickly, the story about the kid who's in Sunday school, and the Sunday school teacher says, what's brown, furry, eats nuts and climbs trees? And the kid says, Mister, I know the answer's Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel. This is the gift of pastors, is they can make any analogy about Jesus. Like Ryan made an analogy about someone finding Tripp hot, and suddenly it was about sitting round the table together and sharing our lives. That's a skill. I mean, I'm just watching that going, I'm imagining someone said to Ryan before he get up, listen, I'm going to give you an impossible. If you say this, I'll give you $100. You say, Tripp's hot, and somehow connect it with the baby Jesus. And he did it. So well done. You won that bet. But anyway, what was the question?
You were going to introduce yourself?
Yes.
Because I realized talking before, different people are familiar with different things. Their reasons for being here vary.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, why is there an Irish guy just sitting there?
Yeah. Okay. Well, hi. My name's Pete. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. I put on the accent because it's the only way I get speaking gigs. People, no one understands what I'm saying, but they don't mind me saying it. So if they knew what I said, no one would listen to a word I had to say. And when Tripp and I lived together, we would do this. We would sit, we'd have a drink, we'd talk about philosophy and life and all of that. And it was a really enjoyable experience. So this is partly what we want to relive here. And also there's enough respect and similarity between us and enough difference to make that hopefully interesting. Tripp is influenced by process thinking, process theology. And I am a believer in the truth, the truth of radical theology. Parotheology. So we're going to discuss that. And actually, I'm interested because the truth is, Tripp is a master interviewer. You're someone who sits down. You love talking about kind of philosophers and theologians. And somebody asked me, I think it was Dan, asked me last night, he said, well, what do you think about what Tripp believes and thinks? Because you've talked to him for a long time. And I said, well, the truth is, Tripp is more excited about ideas. He's not there preaching what he thinks most of the time. Most of the time we're talking about some book that we enjoy. And so part of this, when we sat down to discuss it, I said, Tripp, I want you to do an altar call. I want you to say why you're a Christian, what that means to you, and see if you can get some converts from these Muppets, right? And I am going to do the same. I'm going to preach the gospel tomorrow, try and get some converts to radical theology. Basically, I want to also say, why am I a Christian? Why does that terminology mean something to me? What do I mean when I say it? And then we're going to get a chance to push back on each other. And I think that should hopefully create an interesting discussion that will kind of go beyond the seminars into the various drinking sessions.
And our goal is, as friends, we've talked enough to know that we respect each other and disagree significantly. So I thought if we were doing it in front of people, then everyone else would have permission to differentiate their valuation of people from their assessment of a person's ideas. Because surprisingly,
I still don't know what you believe, Bob.
Well, you've said that so many times, followed by an hour monologue from me, and then he's like, yeah, but what do you believe? And then I'm like, I thought I told you. Who do you think I am? Peter Rollins, dodging every question like a champ?
Yes. I mean, you can't really be a process person, that's ridiculous. So what do you...
Oddly enough, if you were to hang out in the academy, radical theology and process theology are like endangered species. Yeah, so we're just trying to bring them back.
That's true. They are endangered species. That's true.
But you know what else are endangered species? Lots of beautiful animals that like consumer capitalism is destroying their environment. So that doesn't mean they're not awesome.
Yeah. You're trying to win people over by talking about endangered species, are you?
I'm not trying to convert anyone yet, Pete. Tonight is like a kickoff where we meet each other, have fun, drink, and then like we have tomorrow's where the Holy Ghost comes.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And and the thing is, I told Pete that he could go first in the morning, but that was before he went 17 minutes over last night.
Oh, he loves this. By the way, can I say this? Because I have on numerous occasions told Tripp off for going over time. It's one of the things that I talk about. So he was loving it. He was loving it because I went over last night. If you were there last night, I went a little bit over my time, and he hasn't stopped talking about it since. So you are loving that.
It happens.
Yeah.
So before we get started here, what I want you to do is, one, we're going to stand up. And I want you to think about the question. You need to think about a question that you're like, that's a legit question. This is a nerdy question. It's a good question. It's about life, whatever, faith. What doesn't matter. Not about the Lakers. I have a number of them about the Lakers in my head. If you've watched Twitter for NBA today, it's been very active. But think about a question you have that you don't know the answer to. And that is what you're going to tell at least two people you've never met before today. You're going to be like, hi, my name is Tripp, and do Smurfs have souls? Or whatever your question is. That's not mine. That was an example. All right, so everyone stand up. You're thinking of a question you don't know the answer to that you wish you did. And you're going to look, you're about to make new friends. You're making new friends. I love that half the people are like, great, I get to meet new people. And the other half are like, I don't like the people in this room. We'll fake it. Most of them are high quality humans. All right. And now I want to introduce you to my friend Ted. Ted is a professor at Iliff. And now, while as a Claremont graduate, we see Iliff as our ally. There are like 3 liberal Methodist schools. And Iliff is like the cream of the Oreo. So if you're thinking of the United States, West Coast, okay. And Ted is like the double stuff. Because I was interviewing him, and then I realized that we have a shared love for 19th century Germans.
Where's the cheer?
Yeah. I'm serious. 19th century Germans are freaking awesome. I have more student loans dedicated to seminars of 19th century Germans than you can imagine. And humanities PhDs are not, they're not sitting there like you're a lawyer or a doctor ready to make them disappear. No, I pay that check every month and say to myself, Hegel, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, like that. And Ted loves his 19th century Germans. So we're sitting there. I told Nathan right after I interviewed him, I'm like, Iliff is going to be a partner at Beer Camp. And then I was interviewing Ted, and he likes 19th century Germans. And what did Nathan say? How about you do a segment at the opening night called Tripp and Ted's Excellent 19th Century German Philosophical Adventures? Now, I have no idea if this is going to be on the internet, because I might ruin it. But you are the first people to experience said adventure. And if you are not familiar with the nerdy zestiness that is 19th century Germans, buckle your theological safety belt. Yeah, I'm not joking. I would for free teach a seminar called Hegel, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, and then in the spring, Schleiermacher. And that's called Tripp's Eschatological Banquet. And you laugh, but Ted didn't. He was like, I understand. And so if you like Iliff, any 19th century German, or just want to be polite, then put your hands together for Ted as we get off on this excellent adventure. Oh, yeah. But Pete, you have to actually hold your microphone.
I'm mostly going to listen and then correct you when you're wrong. That's my main job.
But, I'm not going to pause when I think you want to say something all the way for you to do this and this.
Yeah, I know.
Plus,
I'm a fan of the 19th century Germans as well, I have to say. Some of my favorite thinkers are in that period. So
yeah.
Hopefully I'll have 1 or 2 things to say.
Okay, but before we talk about the Germans, you need to tell us about Iliff and why in the world a seminary would say to themselves, we should clearly get at a table and hang out at Theology Beer Camp because, what says theological education? Beer camp.
So it's a little hard to say something about Iliff briefly. There's some enthusiastic supporters in the crowd, which I love. So Iliff is a Methodist seminary, but it's the only it's the only sort of mainline seminary in the whole Rocky Mountain region. So if you want to study theology and you're not going to go to Denver Seminary, which is pretty conservative, you're going to come to Iliff, which means we have Wiccans, we have Buddhists, we have atheists, we've got Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, UCC, there you go. If you want to MDiv because you want to be an army chaplain, but your tradition doesn't give MDiv, so you're a Mormon, Denver Seminary doesn't want you, but we do. So we got Mennonites, so there's everybody at Iliff, and it's makes it a great place to have conversations kind of like this.
First question, how did you fall in love with 19th century Germans?
That happened in college, and I thought I was going to be a philosophy major because I wanted to know what the truth was. And then I realized that philosophy wasn't actually about the truth. It was why the people who came before you were totally wrong. And so I did that for a while, but then I realized whatever I say, the next person down the pike is just going to say I'm wrong. So it's kind of a futile endeavor. But in the meantime, I took a couple religious studies classes, and what I learned was that these guys, they study the same people, but they have a different set of questions. And the question is really, this stuff sounds kind of crazy. What does the world look like to these people that makes this not crazy? Right? And that's a great question. And then I took a class in 19th century theology with the guy who ended up becoming my advisor. And what I realized was all the stuff that I think is normal, all the ideas in my head, my basic categories, were invented in the 19th century. So if I want to figure out something about myself, I got to figure out why they were invented and how they were invented and who did it so that I can figure out why I am like I am.
So what's your, first example for someone who's like, I can't believe I drank 5 beers during happy hour, and now he's talking about German philosophy and everything's based on it. And if I hold my eyes open, then I can pay attention. What's the example you give for just how, for someone that hadn't spent time reading it, just how ubiquitous 19th century philosophical framing is for Western people today?
So the thing that blew my mind, and it still blows my mind, is if you act like we just did this thing, right? Tripp, it was embarrassing, and the people I was hanging out with didn't do it, right? Because it's hard to do. But if you go up to somebody that you've never met before and you say, who are you? Not at a superficial level, but who are you, right? You're asking about a certain small number of categories, right? You're asking, and the answer that you're going to get, there's only a few categories that people really go to the core of their identity, and it's stuff like nationality, gender, race, religion, maybe class. Class is kind of a funny one, right? All of those things didn't exist in the form that they exist now. I mean, they seem so obvious, they just seem natural. They seem like they're just part of nature, right? They did not exist in the form they exist now before the 19th century. So if you want to think about why do we think about gender the way we do, or why do we make these racial assumptions even though biologists tell us that race doesn't exist? The answer is in the 19th century.
So before we started, and I told Ted, I'm like, look, here's 2 different ideas I have for what we're going to do when you come up.
Can I interrupt you? Because let me tell you really what Tripp. So Tripp and I did this interview, which was fun because he was fun to talk to, and I was like, hey, can I come hang out at beer camp? And this is literally what he said to me. I got the email. Friday night would be the best night to have you. I think it would be a blast. You don't need a ticket, just come thirsty. And I just texted my wife.
He doesn't even have a drink.
I just found out I'm on the panel. Right? So I just want to set your expectations low because I just found out I'm on the panel.
Look, ambiguity. You know what that is? The invitation to excellence. And I've talked to a number of people that have had your classes. They have told me you're an excellent teacher, a mentor, and that you're a wellspring of knowledge. And I also, 20 minutes ago, was so I had 2 ideas. But I really don't think it's fun at live podcasts if we talk too much before it starts. So you can pick one. And you have a PhD in this, so don't fail. No, I didn't say that part.
Same thing happened to me, by the way. I didn't know I was on this till about 10 minutes ago. He just said there was free beer, and now I'm supposedly doing a whole talk tomorrow. And it was crazy.
Yeah.
This is how he rules.
That's how he rolls.
No.
Now I know.
No, so we were talking, and one of the things that came up in our larger conversation was how a lot of the questions that we have today, both religious, political, cultural questions and things, the way we end up framing them and asking them, we can get into ruts, we can get in to log jams, we can frame them in ways that are so contemporary, we don't end up making progress getting to answers and breaking through. And I remember in the interview, you said, well, I teach lots of classes, but every class is a secret way of explaining. 19th century Germans help you ask better questions.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then maybe you should pick some contemporary questions. We'll talk about them. Tell us what the 19th century Germans say, and then we'll keep drinking. And he didn't say no, so...
All right.
What do you think?
So in the last 10 minutes, I wrote some questions.
Look at that. This is a professional in action.
All right. They get worse as they go on. Do you want the top of the list or the bottom of the list?
Well, you can pick.
All right. What was Luther's favorite beer?
Oh,
Bottom of the list.
What was Luther's favorite beer? Anyone have an opinion? A Dunkel?
All right.
What do you think? You know the answer to this?
I don't know the answer. I don't. I'm not a lawyer. I don't. It's a real question.
No, well, I know that is. I know
his wife was the brewer.
Yeah, I've seen 3 recipes that were in his wife's brew journal, and 2 of them look kind of like amber German lagers, and the other one looks like one of those high gravity during Lent beers. Well, monks during Lent would fast, and they would just drink beer. I mean, it's like a trade-off for celibacy. You're like...
That could lead to trouble.
Man, I'm editing myself as I'm just sitting here. I'm really impressed. I'm not saying certain things.
What else have we got? So these are questions.
All right.
Why don't you go to the top of the list?
Okay, here's the top. So I don't know. So I do have several people in the room who have taken classes with me, and nobody has asked me this question, but I sort of feel like they're too polite because this is the question they really want to ask. So I'm going to ask you guys. I'm interested in social justice. Germans are Nazis. Why should I pay attention to them?
Their student loans were clapping right there. They're just like, you're right, Ted. Thank you.
So when I say that it's the Germans in the 19th century who formulate all these important categories, right? I'm skipping over the fact that 80 years later, Germany is a disaster. And a lot of people think it's their fault, including people like Karl Barth. I don't think it is, but I could use some help from smart people.
So my experience has been that Heidegger's like the test case for German philosophers in the classroom, where Heidegger has inspired most of the 20th century's best theologians, and
he
was a Nazi. And so as a professor, how do you deal with that? Because you can learn things from people that are ignoramuses. I've said that about my grandparents. You haven't met them. We didn't vote the same way. But somehow, I think the older it gets, or the more influential the person is, it's a lot harder for us to hear that person situated in their place and have disdain and also listening in different ways.
Right.
How, pedagogically, how do you negotiate those categories?
So I guess I have a historical answer and a kind of contextual answer. I don't know if those are different. The historical answer is the folks I study are active, like when Napoleon is invading the rest of Europe, and they are anti-imperialists, and they are anti well, they're not anti-monarchs, but they're anti-feudalism, right? They want to set up liberal states with participation of all citizens, and they want citizens, not subjects of a monarch, right? And then things go off the rails in about 1815, when Napoleon's defeated, and all the monarchs who made all these great promises about constitutions, because they needed people to fight for them when they were trying to fight Napoleon. Once Napoleon's gone, they're like, oh, I take it back. Actually, the aristocracy is great. Monarchies are great. You can't have a militia. In fact, you can't even have newspapers anymore. They're too scary. So there's the historical
It depends
answer.
on who's president as to how scary the newspaper is.
Well, yeah. I mean, the attack, yeah, so there's historical precedents for the attack on the free press, for sure. And the contextual answer is that in this time period, these folks really were, I mean, if you just study a theology class, you may not, the ideas might sound kind of esoteric, but these are the people who are literally in the streets fighting on issues of social justice, and they see it coming out of their theology in ways which are not so obvious to us.
So when we use something like religion, most people think everyone knows what the word means.
Yeah.
And they're like, obviously, you're religious. I know what that means. Like, that's a category and stuff that, has its 19th century roots. How would you describe how even a conversation about religion in and of itself is a product of that history and not necessarily clear and distinct conversation today?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So part of what I do is do theology, and part of what I do is do religious studies, and that's religious studies is more like comparative religions, right? Where you're not supposed to have a horse in the game, you're just supposed to analyze what's going on. One of the things that's interesting to me is that people who talk about different religions around the world, and I get a lot of students and just people on the street who know what I do, and they say to me, which is why I try to not tell them what I do, because it's irritating to me, right? But if they find out what I do, they'll say something, they'll either tell me about going to parochial school, or they'll say, well, I think at the end of the day, all religions are the same. Yeah. There's somebody who studied with Jacob Kennard, right? It's all different paths. It's all different paths up the same mountain, right? And the problem with that is that the mountain is not there, right? That there's actually everybody's actually doing different stuff, and if you think they're all doing the same thing as you, but they're doing it in a different language, you're just misinterpreting what they're doing. All right. So there's a great book, not by a theologian, but by a religious studies person. Her name is Tomoko Masazawa, and it's called The Invention of World Religions, right? And she has a bad answer, but she's got the greatest question in the world. She shows that if you ask somebody like anybody before the 18th century, just pick Calvin for an example, right? Because he's a great example. There's no cheers from the Iliff crowd on that one, but
Yay, Calvin!
I'm the only person in the history of Iliff ever to like Calvin. If you ask Calvin, like, what kind of religions are in the world, he'll say, oh, there's 4 religions, right? There's Christianity, there's Judaism, there's Mohammedanism, which is what he calls Islam, and there's heathenism, and that's it. Right? If you ask somebody in the like if you take a course in religious studies in a college in the 20th or 21st century, you're going to say something like, I don't know, there's like 11 or 12 world religions, and they're all great, and they're all roughly doing the same thing, and they help people, find their fulfillment, and they build community, and they're all roughly equivalent. And Tomoko Masazawa's question is, what happens between the 4, 3 of which are false, pre-18th century categories, and the idea that we all have that they're like, oh, there's a bunch of religions and be a good Hindu, that's awesome, right? And her answer is the 19th century. And I think that's absolutely right. And it's people like Schleiermacher, right, who I spend most of my life studying, who change what we think a religion is. And it's not like the Enlightenment folks who think it's about true or false belief, but that religion is a community, it's a cultural connection to a language and to a piece of turf where you live in common, and so you see the world in a common way, and so you experience the world in sort of culturally determined ways, and that is what your religion is, right? And so it would be silly for me. So it would be silly for me to go to India and say to those people, well, you should experience the world my way. But that's crazy because they have a whole different history and culture and language, right? So they should do what they do. I think that's kind of how we think about religion these days. Not just as a set of beliefs, but as a connection to a community and as a way of experiencing what's really real in the universe. And I think I don't know you guys, but if unless you're in super conservative circles, most people are open to the idea that that's going to be culturally variable, right? That's a 19th century idea.
So do you think that the way in which the cultural variation of religion, religious traditions, took place in the 19th century, how would you describe what's kind of happened today where it's not just culturally varied religious traditions, but the assumption is everybody can plausibly see themselves as existing in different or multiple or none? Like, like if seeing multiple religious traditions as something other than a zero-sum game is something the 19th century helped us get over, where you recognize diversity and plurality and this type of thing. I think now we're at a place where you could conceptually identify with one religion, see yourself as moving into another, and at the same time totally see as plausible having none or whatever type thing. Like, how do you understand that shift?
Right. So that's a great question. I think I have two answers to that question. I may have more, but I have at least two. One of them is, there's an upside to this 19th century idea of what religion is, and the upside is that instead of me thinking like my religion's right and yours wrong, I'm going to think, well, mine's right for me and yours is right for you, and we're doing sort of the same thing, right? Which means I'm less likely to kill you. The downside which is good, right? The downside is, it is a 19th century assumption that everybody has, one religion, and it's the culturally appropriate religion, and that it's a problem if somebody says, "Oh, I'm a little bit Buddhist and a little bit Christian," which we get a lot of these days, right? But for people who are formed in this sort of 19th century idea of what religion is, that sounds loopy or superficial. Or like you're the grocery store religious person, like going through and making your choices, right? But that's actually what a lot of people are like these days, right? And so that's it's taken people who think about religion a long time to get their minds around that, because they were so used to thinking, well, Paul was a Jew and then he switched and he was just Christian, and he couldn't have been both, right? Because they're two different things. And the idea that actually maybe he was a Jewish Christian, that's just the last 20 years that people have gotten their heads around that one. Or that my neighbor or my kids might be like, yeah, I go to church, but I like Buddhist ideas too. Like that's, people are slowly getting their heads around that one. That's a shift.
Just to throw in a thought, because this idea, my religion's right for me, your religion's right for you. This isn't a 19th century idea, but the way I think about it is it's maybe better to think, well, my religion's wrong for me and your religion's wrong for you. And, in other words, that religion, often, is a mythology that gives a framework for your sense of reality. But actually, what religion often does, it actually decenters and destabilizes your positioning in the world. It's a decentering reality. So, one way of saying it is, yeah, my religion's wrong for me, and I have to deal with that shit. And your religion's wrong for you, and you're going to have to deal with that shit. And, rather than, I think, a problematic idea, which is my religion's right for me, and your religion's right for you. I just thought, I don't know what
So that's a great point. And I hear you saying in the same sentence two different things, and I wonder if you mean two things or you mean one or the other. One is that, every religious tradition has its shit, and you got to deal with it. And the other one is that what religion is decentering.
Yes, and it's more that they're both intertwined, but it's more the second. So the first is actually the first step I usually do in my work, is I help us see that, there's a kind of distortion within our religious, cultural, political realities. But then the second move is to go, actually entering into that distortion, not trying to get rid of it, not trying to think you can get away with it, but actually the process of the parable, the process of the destabilizing of ethics is actually what, with at least, within Christianity or Judaism, you can see this happening. To use one example, C.S. Lewis, good Belfast man, not 19th century, but good Belfast guy. He had an argument, you'll all know, Jesus, liar, lunatic, or Lord. In other words, Jesus was either
I hate that
a liar What's that?
I hate that argument.
Oh yeah, I love it. He's completely wrong, but for different reasons. Is it, so either Jesus is a liar,
I thought Narnia was great.
yeah, or he's a lunatic. He's crazy because he's saying he's God, or he's Lord. But if you take like a Kierkegaardian kind of perspective on this, it's actually the other way around. Jesus is a liar and a lunatic, and hence maybe he's Lord. In other words, Jesus is unethical and immoral from our ethical and moral positionings. Jesus comes in as an immoral reality, and he comes in as a lunatic against wisdom. You know, our wisdom traditions, Christ enters as a projectile, a destructive rupture. So that's what I mean is in the radical tradition, this idea that actually the religious tradition is the entering into the destabilizing.
Yeah, okay.
So I have a question.
Which, by the way, is very 19th century.
It is.
Oh, go ahead.
So if you've ever had a class of you know the sentence is coming. That's the Schleiermacher thought of that.
Yeah, except it's Schleiermacher. Now, I hate to say it because he's an expert in Schleiermacher, and I just dabble.
Oh, yeah. Because you've never just decided to speak about stuff.
Yeah, that I don't. Yeah, yes, yeah. Although I do try to avoid things I don't know about, but I usually fail. But my thing with Schleiermacher is underneath the antagonisms and the difference, there is seemingly this harmony and this wholeness, and religion connects us with an underlying harmony that exists beneath the antagonisms of existence. And this is my problem with the Schleiermacher I've read, that actually, what if, this is my problem with liberal theology actually, is that underneath the antagonism, the distortions in reality are not the core. Chaos is not at the core of reality, but rather peace, harmony, and love. Whereas I think the radical theological move is to say that actually a chaos and a rupture exists at the very core of reality itself. Now, when I say it like that, everybody goes, well, I like Schleiermacher more than what Pete's saying because that sounds mental. But honestly, I think it's good news. But we'll talk about that tomorrow.
So this is an interesting conversation, but so yes and no. So I would say that at the core of Schleiermacher, you're not wrong, right? That what faith is for him is this confidence that the universe is harmonious at the end of the day, right? That is not a human reality, right? So as humans, as every human experiences the world to their very core, it is chaotic. And the part of the part that's disruptive or unsettling about Schleiermacher is, and why he thinks everybody needs religion, is because humans spend most of their time thinking about stuff, which is like an active way of trying to organize the world, or doing stuff, which is an active way of trying to change things in the world. And religion is the one sort of passive moment when the universe talks back. And so it's the one point you have, the one opportunity you have, if you're paying attention, which most people are not, which is his definition of sin, right? It's the one opportunity you have to understand that, oh, actually the way I thought that the world was harmonious is full of crap. And that's profoundly unsettling. That might lead you then, so at one level, Schleiermacher's agreeing with you, but because he's a Calvinist, at one level he wants to think, but yeah, at the end of the day,
yeah,
when everything is revealed, I will see that there is a harmony.
And this for me is the difference between Kant and Hegel in some respects, but it's a difference between Newtonian physics and quantum mechanics. So in Newtonian physics, there is the known, what we can know in principle and in reality, and then there is the unknown, which is why the rules operate the way they do, right? So God kind of is maybe the unknown, and then there's the world, which is ultimately knowable, even if we don't ever get there. If we know everything, like Laplace and his idea that if we know everything about the positions of atoms and the speed, we could technically tell everything about the past and predict everything about the future, right? Now, within quantum mechanics, there was this explosion of an idea that actually the chaos that we think exists in reality, but ultimately underneath everything it works in a harmonious way. We start to glimpse that perhaps there is an antagonism at the very heart of being itself. Obviously, the double slit experiment and we have particle duality, all that kind of stuff is a kind of sense, and you have this in mathematics as well, and the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You have these certain things that suddenly you go, what if the chaos and the disruption that we witness is not a type of illusion or or something that we can get over in the next life. But what if actually that tells us something about the heart of reality itself? And then from that reading, faith is not harmony. Faith is being able to embrace the absurd. And so that's why I'm more interested in the existential strain of thought that came out of the 19th century. Because I think that there's two strains. There's the progressive strain, I think Schleiermacher, stuff like that. But there's also Kierkegaard, and there's also, this Nietzsche, and there's that, and even Karl Barth in his early critique of, in his epistle to the Romans, which I like. There is this other stream, which is that in a sense part of faith is embracing the absurd.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, but first I'm going to play Schleiermacher if he knew quantum mechanics. As a good Platonist, Schleiermacher would probably point out to you, which I do know that you use science more as a example, and I sometimes take you too seriously when you use it. So, like, what you would call chaos at the quantum level is only indeterminate. Like, the indeterminacy is of a single instance, but the ratio and predictability that happens at the quantum level,
but it's ontological.
An individual instance might be indetermined, but you know the batting average before you start anyone swings.
But indeterminacy
I'm just telling you that Schleiermacher would say.
Not ontic. Yeah.
Schleiermacher would say, you can worry about that pitch if you want, Pete, but it's all good. Tony Gwynn's going to bat 300, even if he's 70. Yeah. That's a baseball reference from America. I'm sorry.
But, and that's what I like about it. That's what I like. Is this is why I think it's the difference between Kant and Hegel. Hegel, in a sense, enfolds unknowing into knowing. That's what I think modern science does, in a sense. Whereas in the past, the unknown was outside the known. Now, in contemporary mathematics and contemporary science, the unknown is folded into the known. The same as in psychoanalysis. The unconscious is the unknown folded into the known.
Are you a Hegelian or a Kantian?
Hegelian.
All right,
Radical theologians read Hegel differently. Now, here's the question. 19th century did something that everybody does today, whether or not they do it. Every person that's in any religious tradition, you all know a few things. If you were not a product of a random sperm winning a race at a particular time in a certain place, you would not be who you are. You might not exist. But if you were born 50 years earlier or 100 years earlier in a different continent, you could have different religions. You would be at different beer camps. And we all know the thrownness, the historicity, and all these things shape us.
So the Mormon beer camp is just less fun. Let's just throw that out there.
Well,
I'm a pluralist, but it's less fun.
So, man, I'm passed on a really funny joke. Sometimes. Okay, so the 19th century, in particular, Protestants in Europe were the first to pioneer the criticism of the very religion that you were shaped by. Right? There was a point in time where the distance between your own identity and the world you were thrown into, including the religion, family, tribe, and all that kind of stuff, it was it just stuck to you, and you would not know how to take that clothing off.
Right.
Schleiermacher, Feuerbach, Nietzsche, Marx, all these people were able to go hey, nice shirt. And you're like, shirt, that's who I am. No, that's called Luther.
Right.
Maybe you could both describe, when you think of the birth of the criticism of religion that then happened in the academy, now half the people here are secretly Nietzsche fans and they don't even know it.
Right.
Or everyone's a little bit Marxist. You see a TV preacher with a nice car, his own plane, and all of a sudden you're like, I know where the motivation comes for this. What was that process for each of you, where the 19th century's criticism of religion became not just nerd's pursuit, but the very condition of anyone attempting religion, faith, spirituality today? Everyone's a critic of religion before they even know their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say one thing especially on Marx, just in terms of the inherent struggle at the core of existence, and we'll get into, obviously, the critique of religion. Feuerbach is one of my favorite kind of minor philosophers. Marx was the one who kind of, in a sense, revealed that what maybe unifies us in the midst of our historicity, our thrownness in the world, our contingency, because we are all like a philosopher, in a sense, who rolls dice, decides what she believes, and then argues from that position. Because in a sense, you are thrown into the world, and before you get to the age where you can think, maybe for you it was 14, 18, 20, whatever age you started to think critically, you have years of a language, a context, books, stories, all of that has shaped you. And then you've got an option. Your option is to defend that or to begin to pick it apart. As if your mind is a shopping trolley. It's already filled when you go into the shopping market of ideas and you have to take some out and put some in. Now, Marx then comes in and doesn't say, oh, right, so everything's contingent and radical. You've got your religion, I've got my religion. We're all, in a sense, atomized, separated. Because he said, well, there's one thing we have in common. The antagonism itself. That in a sense, there is a struggle. And evolution is a form of this, where evolution happens because there's an antagonism in existence, which, causes repetition of difference. So what you find in Marx is actually how I can unify with my Buddhist neighbor, or my Muslim friend, or my, the person who works in the shop, in a sense is not necessarily in our various contingent differences. We're all nuts. It's in this that we're all struggling within those, the struggle of reality itself, the struggle of life. And so, for Marx, there was a really interesting move to say, well, it's not about unifying over something positive. We unify over a negative as in we unify over the struggle of existence itself. I think it's a really interesting move.
Yeah, with the addition that it's an economic struggle. Right. I mean, there's other ways of thinking about that struggle.
Yeah, now, and he means obviously economics in a very wide, a wide sense, wider than we probably mean by that word. So that you can see how that informs, some of my thinking in terms of where we unify is in, we unify in our various struggles. But in terms of the 19th century critique of religion in particular, Feuerbach was incredible because he was the one who, really formalized this notion of projection, where he said, like, in the same way, you've heard me say this before probably, but I live in LA and I've noticed that people's dogs and their owners, they look the same. If you want to know what a person's ideal sense of self is, you look at their dog. Is it a small, cute little thing that they carry in their handbag? Well, it tells you a lot about their ideals. Is it a big, massive dog? Whatever. Then it tells you something about what they want. So in the same way that dogs look like their owner's ideals, Feuerbach says people's gods look like their owner's ideals. That what we do is we create a screen, and he has a very interesting way of describing why.
Are you dyslexic?
Did I say dogs again?
Yeah.
Dogs and gods?
Yeah.
Did I get that wrong? Did I?
You're using... At one point, I thought the metaphor was going to switch to reality, but you kept using the metaphor.
Oh, did I? Well, no. In the same way that dogs look like their owners, so do their gods.
Yeah, okay.
Did I say that right? I said it right there. Thank you.
Right. I just got confused. Before that, I think...
Yeah.
All I was trying to think is what you thought about me after you met my puppies. That's what I...
Well, yeah, I know. They're very cute little
and what
things.
Does it say about
everything about you needed to know.
What does it say about you that Dino likes you best?
Oh yeah, I love dogs, I gotta say. So Feuerbach developed an idea that we project some of our ideals onto a screen that we call God. So if you want to know what a people's ideals are, you look at their gods. And that nowadays doesn't sound that amazing or incredible. A lot of us take that for granted to a greater or lesser extent. But, that was an incredible insight. The idea that in order for me to come to know myself, I have to project out, put my ideals out. In psychoanalysis, this is called the mirror phase, where you put yourself out and then you take that back. Feuerbach said, well, as a community and as a people, we need to project our ideals out to see something of ourselves and then reclaim that back. That was incredible.
Yeah. So in the history of Theology, Feuerbach always gets attacked as an anti-theologian, but I actually think he's a great theologian.
Great theologian. And Karl Barth, again, I'm not a Barthian, but I love Karl Barth took Feuerbach seriously. Yeah. He wrote a preface to Feuerbach's book, The Essence of Religion, Christianity, Essence of Christianity. It's great. Now, the reason why Barth liked him, this is why, is because he thought Feuerbach shows the limitations of liberal theology. Yeah. And that's why John Caputo says, God is not a projection, but a projectile. Because he says Feuerbach critiques the notion of God that is just a defender and a legitimizer of our ethical, our political, our cultural positions. And he says that God, in a sense, is a no to all of our yeses. A very kind of Barthian idea. But God enters the world as that which ruptures our sense and circle of reality. And so that, that's why Barth actually liked Feuerbach, because he thought Feuerbach actually shows the ultimate bankruptcy of liberalism.
Yeah.
You would disagree with him?
I would, but I like Feuerbach and Barth. Because I think it's I mean, this is now a meta argument, which in some ways is less interesting than like talking about reality. But the reception of Schleiermacher is a faulty reception. And a lot of the people who end up attacking him, including people like Barth, maybe primarily Barth, they sort of domesticate him and then attack him for being domesticated, but he's not domesticated, he's wild, right? So you gotta read him for what he was saying. But, the defense of Schleiermacher may not be the most interesting thing.
I don't know, I was already thinking about it. Just as an aside, Schleiermacher was one of the first people to recognize that theology is not just a different discourse than your own religious enactment, but it was a second-order discourse that its fidelity should be to the experience and engagement of the unknown. And so theology is not a servant of the tradition where the discourse happens, but the depth dimension where the experience takes place, where you come to know yourself as known and engaged with the ultimate. And also, Schleiermacher's critique of religion, one of the things about his critique of religion I always liked was he writes he gives these series of talks talking about, to the cultured despisers of religion. And then the last one, they think, like any good German theologian, you talk about art and stuff and you get people really into you. And at the end, you're like, but the best religion is Christianity. And Schleiermacher doesn't do that. He goes, I think Christianity is cool now, but we might evolve past that or go a completely different direction. But, that's nice. And so even someone who's in the third critique of Christianity, specifically Schleiermacher had, is he put the Trinity at the end of his systematic theology, because 99.99% of Christians that have ever lived don't know what the hell the Trinity's about, and they're heretics if they talk about it. Yeah. Now, personally, I don't mind Gregory of Nyssa and the Cappadocians, but no one knows what the hell they meant until you go in debt to take a degree learning about it. So Schleiermacher, for the people, was like, let's put the Trinity at the end. Let's talk first. The first 700 pages is involved on the way Jesus, his teachings and stuff impacts you and tells you not to be a dick. And then Trinity. Close. So, those are his, three critiques of religion I always liked about Schleiermacher.
But that's exactly my concern with liberal theology. But
you can save that for tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. Fair dues.
All right. So I'm going to get one more question. I don't know why I get one more question.
Do I get one more question?
Because you're the guy.
You want a question? Oh, you asked the last question.
It doesn't have to be the last one.
Will you say whatever you want to say?
All right. So Schleiermacher. So when you read these guys, especially 19th century guys, and they're almost all guys, right? It sounds very disembodied and esoteric, but all this stuff, Schleiermacher in particular, comes out of their experience of the world, right? So I love talking about their biographies connected to their ideas. Schleiermacher spent 18 months living with a guy named Friedrich Schlegel, who's a very famous author, critic, blah, 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 right? Okay. So they lived together for 18 months. How long did you guys live together?
Around that amount. He learned a lot from me.
Okay. So they were tight. I mean, they lived together, they wrote together, they did everything together, and all of their friends, whenever they talk about Schleiermacher and Schlegel living together, they always say, oh, and Schleiermacher was the wife in the relationship. So I was wondering if you guys would discuss the gendered nature of your relationship when you live together.
Okay. That's a private conversation.
Did you come up with this question on your own, or did someone put you up to it? I'll tell you two things, and Pete can decide the final answer to the question. One, when we lived together, I was writing a book. Because I had lost my job, I didn't work on it the first 3 months I was supposed to work on the book. So then I had like a short period of time to write a book, which you can purchase in the back. And Pete, as a single man in Los Angeles, not like with 2 dogs and 2 children at that point, like he went out after 8 o'clock and did things. So...
Terrible things.
No, we aren't going to talk about cuddle puddles. It's okay. Like the... No, so I sit in the garage because if you're trying to stay awake to write a book, there's nothing better than like a pot of coffee and smoking cigars while you're typing. And then when Pete shows back up between 1 and 2, we make mixed drinks until I can go to bed. It is a real healthy life period in my life. And then Pete would come in, and then I don't know how long it had been, but I was like at the chapter where Fortress is like, you need to add 2 chapters about the historical Jesus and stuff like that and cut more of your theology chapters because this is for normal people. And honestly, like 10,000 words about the difference between Logos and Spirit Christologies is not going to cut it. And I'm like, that's excellent material. So I had all my historical Jesus books out and all my little like Post-its in it. And I'm writing it. And Pete walks in, and this is what Pete does. He goes, well, I can't do his accent, but all my accents are French. And there's someone here that will sing karaoke with me if I use a French accent. So Pete is now French. He's like, oh, Tripp. I knew you liked Jesus, but look at all these Jesus books. What are you doing? And I was like, well, he wanted me to add a chapter about the historical Jesus, and I didn't even want to do it, so I'm just going to write it all tonight. And that's a lot of books about Jesus. You really read these? And I was like, yeah, I'm a Christian theologian. Ha! And then he pauses and he opens the freezer and pulls out gin and starts to make a thing. And then he looks at me and is like,
"This is fake news.
This is not fake at all. This is 100% true." I mean, that's my that, and our family picture on Easter that year has Pete in it, and the dogs are with him.
Yeah, thank you. I've got nothing more to add.
Well, I don't know how to answer the question. I was just telling. That was my 2 Pete stories.